Hello, everybody, and good morning. My name is Laurence Moroney, and I'm the lead AI advocate at a small internet startup called Google. You may have heard of us. And my job and my day job and what I really deal in is around artificial intelligence and advocating for artificial intelligence, and in particular around generative AI. And one of my favorite sayings is, if you don't say what you mean, you can never mean what you say. And generative AI is one of those things that is fundamentally misunderstood and has led to a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So today, we would really like to talk about, we'd really like to peel apart what we mean when we talk about the technologies of generative AI and how they can be used to really enable creators and make life much, much easier for creators. And I'm joined on stage by my good friend, Bob Simonds, who's really at the cutting edge of this and in really understanding how to use generative AI and all of AI to make storytelling a much better experience. Bob.
Thank you, Laurence. I'm Bob Simonds. I have a movie studio. I've done about 125 different films, and we're very deeply right now into how can we use AI to help tell better stories and unlock human creativity. I used to say that Laurence lives 5 years in the future, which is a really sort of interesting thing. And for those of us who make content, it's a very interesting time because, as many of you know, Hollywood has been crippled by a writer's strike, which is now over, but the elephant in the room was always how the writers were traumatized by this thing called generative AI. And as a guy who makes movies, I always think of sort of movie metaphors. And I remember the story I was told about, I think it was like 1890, when the Lumiere brothers showed a 90-second clip of a train entering a station. And the people who were in the audience watching this panicked and ran out of their seats because they just didn't know what they were dealing with. And I think a lot of that exhilaration and panic are what's happening right now, at least on the creative side. So I think what we're going to talk a little bit about is a lot of conversations around generative AI have to do with how, at its core, there's an element of glorified autofill, which is you give it some inputs, it scrapes different parts of the web, depending on what model you're using, and it gives you, it does the work for you. And that can be hugely, hugely helpful. What we're trying to figure out is how can you take the other side of the coin? How do you basically use these tools to create the perfect collaborator, the perfect partner? How everybody in this audience has creativity in themselves. They have that spark of originality. It's just really tough to access. And if you can use these tools to help bring that out of people, I think that we'll be unlocking massive human potential.
And I totally agree with Bob, and I think one of the things that is generally misunderstood when we think about the word generative is that we lean completely into generative. Generative AI can do a very, very good job of taking words and putting them on a page, but do those words have meaning? Do those words have emotion? One of the projects that I worked on, and it's actually the one that I met Bob through, was that I, pre-ChatGPT, was working in generative AI with what I was calling small language models, and I was generating scripts for a TV show. And the scripts that I was generating were completely nonsensical. They had a little bit of plots, they had a little bit of story in them, but it kind of meandered and went nowhere, until human actors got involved. And when the human actors read through the script and they brought the emotion into that, then suddenly we saw that something interesting was happening here. And we ended up coining the term, as Bob and I started working together, that we called assistive AI, as opposed to generative AI. And when we think about from the creator's point of view, as well as working in technology, I'm also a writer. And as a writer and as an artist, I always like to think of it as when I generate a final product, what's happening is really two things. Number one is the art that's coming from within me, the story that I want to tell, the emotions that I want to convey. And then number two is the craft. And then there's a specific craft that you have to do, for example, to create a screenplay for a movie or a TV show. There's another craft if it's going to be for a comic book. There's another craft if it's going to be for a novel. And there's all of this overhead of craft that I would have to do, and I would have to do effectively, that in some ways impeded on my art. And with the idea of generative AI and the idea of like, instead of thinking of having these tools to create the words for me, that if they're doing the entire ecosystem of stuff around that for me, analyzing my story, finding faults in it, helping me find the right beats, helping me find a strong protagonist, and all of these kind of things, now suddenly I am a far more effective artist. It is not taking away from my art, and in some ways it's actually enhancing my art. And we have a joke between us that, it's like 90 minutes of video does not make a movie, right? You can give a kid a camcorder and they can run around and like they can film a whole bunch of stuff for 90 minutes, but that's not a movie because it's not telling a story. And this is where, when we start thinking about generative AI, going beyond writing, going into all areas of our life, that here's where the opportunity really lies. Not in replacing human creativity, but in enhancing it. Another example that I always like to use, I'm in software after all, is like when we think about coding and software developers. There are many people out there who will tell you that software development is dying and software development is a dying art and you're wasting your time in learning it. I'm going to give you the counter argument because I think generative AI, large language models, and all of those kind of things will make you a better software developer. Because if anybody has ever done any software development, or you've worked with people who do it, a very small part of what you do is actually the coding. A very large part of what you do is writing test cases, writing documentation, upgrading when you have new dependencies, and all of these extra things that are very difficult that add value are where large language models can be used and where they can enhance you as a human to be better at your job and to be more productive at your job. And so, there are so many areas like this, and I think when it comes to telling stories, to come back to this, to be able to think about the emotion within stories, that giving somebody the ability to unlock themselves and to unlock their creativity and to be the next big storyteller is just an amazing opportunity.
I actually really liked, obviously, a lot of what you're saying. It's interesting because we're training our model with a lot of the biggest, or at least most expensive writers in Hollywood, people who struggle with creativity on a daily basis. And they're not afraid of generative AI. What they like about this, and the thing that the overwhelming note is always, slow it down, it's doing too much for me. And there's an architecture to story, they want those guardrails, but they want to actually pull it out of themselves because, the cliche is that, art has a soul, and AI, at least yet, has no emotion. It can mimic emotion, it has no empathy, it can mimic empathy, but when you're telling a story, it's not really about the plot. That's the equivalent of just walking around and filling 90 minutes of footage. What we're really doing, and I've said this before, is that we're selling emotion. So what actually makes you engage in the content, makes you engage in the story, is that it's eliciting some sort of emotional response to you. So what we're trying to do is use this to make those emotional markers more intense and more powerful, because as we all know, when you make a movie, what you're really saying is, give me money and I'll change the way you feel for 90 minutes or however long it's going to be. I'll make you scared. I'll make you laugh. I'll get you exhilarated. But that emotional transaction is what makes global content on its core level. It's not just pretty visuals or saying something and having the optics show up. And I think that, again, I've got a big bias because it really is about the story and that emotion. But I think we're getting close, on a number of ways where this is really becoming very powerful.
Absolutely, and I think, one of the things that we've discovered by being down in the trenches between getting deep into the technology and then getting deep into the storytelling process, and not just the storytelling process, but also the story-making process. All of the things that you have to do to go from the idea within a writer's heart to a finished movie on the screen that will change people's emotion. There are so many steps along the way. There's so many areas that could be made more efficient, that could be made faster, that could be made cheaper. There's so many ways that that could then help unlock creativity by not wasting time on things that you may not have to spend a lot of time on. And here's where we begin to see, again, if we get seduced by the idea of a large language model doing all the work for us, we're going to miss that train. And what I would argue is, let's not get seduced by that. Let's kind of start looking at the utility that we can get from these things, not just in the storytelling process, but in every process out there. When we start seeing that whole ecosystem of work that we do around the core business idea that we have, that's when these things can get really, really exciting.
Well, it's funny, because when you talk about, look, in Hollywood and in Bollywood and in China, there's going to be massive disruption. I mean, we are arguably one of the most inefficient users of capital on the planet, and have been historically. You know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a year, you're making a $100 million bet because, yeah, that sounds kind of good, right? And then you go and you see the movie at a test screening, and you go, yeah, that didn't work. Or, God, I wish we could have made some changes before that. Now, people in Hollywood aren't idiots. They're actually quite smart. And they've tried lots of different versions of how they can try to test. I think with AI, this is the first time that we're actually able to get a real response from the ideas, the casting choices, so that when we actually say yes to the $100 million investment, hopefully it's a better use of capital, and it's closer to what you want it to be. So I think that will change everything. It'll change marketing, it'll change distribution, it'll change everything for the better. And it will actually open up content making to sort of everybody in the world, because they'll be able to tell stories that cross boundaries and that engage people all over the place. And that really hasn't been possible yet, or this will certainly be accelerated.
Yeah, storytelling is a way not just for us to preserve culture, but also to create new culture. And one of the things at this intersection between AI and storytelling is that level of power that we have to be able to make that more efficient and to be able to make it better and to reduce waste, to me, is incredibly inspiring. You know, I like to believe that the future is all around us. It's waiting to be born. And the future is usually born in moments of transition or moments of revelation. And one of the things that we are facing today, and one of the things that leads to the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around generative AI, is that it's hitting both at the same time. We're having that moment of transition, and we're having that moment of revelation. As a society, we're generally good at dealing with one or the other, but now we have to deal with both. And I believe how we can deal with both and how we can deal with it effectively is having that firm hand on the steering wheel, understanding what these technologies are not just as much as what they are, and being able to build really good examples and to be able to share with each other really good examples of the benefits that we can all reap from that, from Hollywood to software development to who knows what else. Being able to gather in summits like this one is just fantastic, where we can exchange and we can share ideas, and hopefully we can inspire each other. I've met so many amazing people this week. It's my first time in Saudi Arabia, and hopefully it's not my last time. I'm looking forward to many, many more. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody. Shukran lak.
Thank you very much. Thank you.